Which of the three bricks did you like best?
None. Well, all of them. I mean, I'll explain. Hi everyone. Here we are at another brick in the wall, part 3. But before I dive into that, I just want to talk briefly about something that has been a recurring theme along the way in the conversations, comments, feedback that I am getting from you, from many of you. So many of you have written and said, you have to watch the movie. You really have to watch the movie. It will explain. It will tell you. Or, have you watched the movie yet? And, okay, the answer is yes, I've watched the movie now, since the first listens. However, I intentionally did not watch the movie before I did my first listens. Why? Because I wanted to make sure that my impression of the music was completely uninfluenced by a visual representation. Because every time you take a work of art, whether it's a piece of music or a book, something literary, and you recast it as a movie, visuals are a very powerful thing. And movies, of course, they're highly visual, but they're also very, very good at focusing our attention and developing certain specific ideas, not necessarily giving us the whole picture and letting our imagination explore freely to the same degree every potential avenue. And so a movie can and does help us understand and explore a work of art because it can delve into a certain perspective, highlight certain elements, bring certain things to our attention and build them up in a way that helps us to really understand and expand our view. However, it always comes at a cost because at the same time that some of those elements are being developed and explored and our attention is being drawn to them, we're also being drawn away from other possible perspectives. As an example, take Orwell's 1984 book. Read the book, and then when you go to the movie, it is so incredibly disappointing because the book allows so much more room for imagination, whereas the movie channels us into a specific narrative that is more limited than the original work. Or White Fang by Jack London. Or we can even think about really amazing movies like, let's say, The Pianist, directed by Polanski. The principle is the same, and that is that the visuals, regardless of how good they are, they limit your imagination. Now, let's go back to The Wall. Actually, to this very song, where, if you remember in my first listen, which is here if you haven't seen it yet, was done before I watched the movie. Right at the beginning, I said, what is this sound? It sounds like a person falling. And then I said, but you can only fall once. And at that point, I moved on because I was not sure and I knew I would be digging into it later. Then, of course, eventually, watching the movie, I saw that it was Pink destroying TVs. It had nothing to do with anybody falling past a window. But let's imagine for a moment that there never was a movie. And none of us would have known that that sound was Pink attacking TVs. What if I had pursued the idea of Pink or somebody else falling past the window? Who knows where this image might have taken us, what scenarios or conclusions we might have reached, or what other possible explanations for that noise, interpretations of that sound we might have taken time to dig into. That is all to say that, of course, I appreciate the Wall movie, and I have even incorporated much of it into this series because I do believe that it contributes valuable content in this journey, especially since, in this case, the original creator of the music was significantly involved with the creation of the movie as well. So there is a very close link between the two. But my principle is that In such circumstances where we have an original work of art, such as a piece of music or a book or even a painting, we should certainly consume that first on a personal level before going to explore further interpretations and dissertations of it. In this way, we can truly experience and explore it through our own unique perspectives without slanting our view by another's take on it. By doing this, it becomes personal. In a way, we make it ours, and it leaves us open to contribute new perspectives which otherwise might not have emerged if we had first been conditioned by someone else's perspective. So, listen to the music or read the book first. Now, let's start by talking about the music first, without the movie. This is the same tune as Another Brick in the Wall Part 1 and Part 2. And I want to talk about those because now that we've heard all three of them, it's interesting to compare how they were used. Essentially, each of these parts, they're all the same song, just different verses set to different styles of accompaniment. The tune remains the same. Although it's interesting to notice, it's an interesting study on what the possibilities of a simple little musical element contains, how it can be recast and developed in different ways. Because in part 1, we heard it in this very contemplative, reflective way. And you hear how, when it says, Daddy's flown, and it hovers across the ocean. Whereas the next time it comes, part 2, we have the protest chant, and it gets a little bit more aggressive. And then it's recast again in this part 3 with even a little bit more syncopation added to it. And in that way, taking the same tune, not merely changing the way it's sung, the tone quality of the voice and the instrumental backing and support, but also slight tweaks in the rhythm and the pacing of it. This same little figure becomes suitable for significantly different musical styles. It's interesting to listen to all three of them back to back. What if Waters hadn't broken them up and placed them at different separate points in the album? What if he had simply sung them as one song, start to finish, somewhere along the way in the album? I don't think it would have been nearly as effective. And this is a great example of how important are time and space and context when creating a compelling musical work. Whether it's a single note, a chord, a verse, or a whole song, it's not just about the nuts and bolts, which I do focus on a lot, but it's not just about the nuts and bolts, the building material, that makes it shine brightly or fall flat. It's also at least as much, if not more, about where and how and when it happens, and what comes before and after it. I often explain this concept to my young students by telling them that it's like taking a picture you've painted and displaying it. You could pin it up on a bulletin board that is crowded with other pictures, or let's say mom's refrigerator where everything is stuck with magnets. Or you can put it in its own special frame and hang it on a wall by itself. Or you can place it in a gallery exhibit where it flows with and is placed in the context of other pictures, works of art. That's Liesel. In each one of those places, the picture is the same, but our impressions of it and our ability to appreciate it will be different. Now here, Waters has taken that concept and applied it on, we could say, a macro scale, not simply framing it and mounting it up for us to view and appreciate in one location, but by taking different parts of it and displaying them at different points in our viewing experience. And this has the effect of shaping and focusing the entire narrative of the complete album and making it all to be about the wall. Many of the songs on this album are, we could easily argue, far more musically rich than this little motivic tune. Think about Comfortably Numb, or The Trial, or Hey You. And with the sheer quantity of musical material we find in the album, it would be quite easy to decide that some other song should be the one that directs our interpretation and understanding of the entire work. But by the simple technique of returning to this song multiple times, it becomes the theme, we could say the interpreter, for the entire work. It is what guides us. It is through its lens that we view and understand all the other songs across the whole album. It's essentially a strophic song, meaning each verse is sung, at least for the most part, to the exact same tune. And because of that, each verse comes to a full close musically at its end, so that each verse can stand on its own. We don't end up feeling like any part of it is incomplete when it stops. And I found it interesting to read the comment sections on YouTube for each of the 3 parts of the song. I looked up part 1, part 2, part 3 on YouTube channels, and each part has its loyalists, ones who feel that one part or the other is the best part of the trilogy. Of course, much of that is subject to how one relates to and connects with the music. Which part speaks most powerfully to your own experience? Just like I was talking about at the beginning, in terms of how our experience informs our interpretation and our imagination. And yet, from my perspective, the best part of the whole song is the fact that it returns and returns again, each time orchestrated differently according to the theme of the verse being sung. Back when we heard part 1, it was achingly empty, reaching out for a connection that never was and never could be. Then when we got to part 2, it was the revolt of the ignorant victims of ignorance, crying out for something better while at the same time destroying everything with nothing to give in return. Now finally we come to part 3, in which its very brevity expresses the closed mind, the end of argument and discussion. One of the strong, noticeable features of this part 3 is the drum beat, the pounding thump, thump, thump. And in my first listen, I thought of some different possibilities for what it might signify. Is he pounding the wall, testing its strength? It's a nicely well-built wall. Let's see. Is it going to hold up and do the job? Is he pounding his fist down like a gavel, saying, I have made my decision and this is how it is? Or is this still a construction zone with the pounding and machinery of setting things into place? And you'll remember that at one point, there was one moment where the instrumental combination of instrumental sounds made it sound like the final brick being set and slid into place, at least in my imagination. Or could we take it as being a feverish, adrenaline-powered, pounding heartbeat? Or like banging one's head against a wall, blindly hoping for a breakthrough, or fighting against restraint and barriers and containment? Or it can be all of these at once. You see, it depends on our imagination, the way we interpret. What do we see there? Now, this set of Another Brick in the Wall is where we get the main musical leitmotif of the entire work. I've talked about this before, and it is this 4-note figure that this song is built on, whether it is Daddy's flown across the ocean, or we don't need no education, or I don't need no arms around me. It's all the same little motif. Yes, it shows up in other songs, but each time it shows up elsewhere, that little leitmotif refers us to the bricks in the wall being spoken of in this song. And so this song is motivic for us in 2 ways. First, by providing us with the leitmotif, and that we can find and use as a reference to pull us back to this theme. Second, by functioning in itself as a kind of leitmotif through its threefold occurrence within the album. It's interesting to note that each of the 3 iterations of this song occurs in the first half of the album. By placing each part in relatively close proximity to the other parts, we feel a much greater sense of continuity than if they had been placed more equally spaced throughout the album. It's also a kind of setting the stage. What I mean is, the early placement of all 3 parts serves as a means of setting us up to interpret everything afterwards through this lens, without having to disturb our journey with it later on. So it's really important for us to let it become embedded in our awareness, to retain it in our memory. And this simple, motivic 4-note tune is highly effective for getting stuck in our minds that way. Good choice, Waters. Because without it, as we step into the last half of the album, we run the risk of losing our way, or getting lost in the weeds, so to speak. Okay, now let's think about this 3rd part, about its meaning both within the trilogy and within the entire album. So we have here Another Brick in the Wall, part 3, and as I mentioned earlier, all 3 parts are in the first half of the album. And the first question which comes to mind is, why 3 of them? Well, I've already kind of answered this question from the musical perspective, but now let's explore it from its ideological perspective. Let's remember, the first one, with its almost entirely muted mellotones and a lot of echo and reverb effects applied, along with its highly repetitive, hypnotic music and the desperate cry, "Daddy, what'd you leave behind for me?" That is Pink, the child. The second one is a mindless, numbing chant which connects people through the most effective emotional reaction existing in that environment: revolt. And the pulse in the percussion, highlighting the protest march-like rhythm of the chant. That is Pink, the teenager. And now the third one, near the end of the first half of the album, where we have Pink, the adult. It seems that each of these 3 parts acts like a marker of time, identifying the stepping stones in his journey, in the development of the wall, of that perfect isolation. It's like he is saying, if you don't understand anything else, you should at least get this. As a child, as a teenager, and as an adult, I have been mistreated, pushed away, hurt, and that's why I've become perfectly isolated behind my wall. And there are several similar elements throughout the 3 parts, one of which is revolt. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. But now, in the 1979 interview, Waters described the third brick as Pink convincing himself really that his isolation is a desirable thing. That's all. All right, we can say, all right, Roger, if that's all, it's simple. I got it. But it can be simple without being simplistic. If it were simplistic, we wouldn't have so much sonic and video material to dig into, right? So, this song, although part of the entire narrative, is not a narrative itself. And in this context, it's quite fitting that it doesn't offer new music either, because it doesn't reveal new events, but it is rather a statement, a decision. The final decision, or the final solution, if you wish, as he says in Waiting for the Worms. It is Pink's conclusion, after all this time, all these events, all his suffering. He says, I don't need no arms around me, and I don't need no drugs to calm me. We are presented here with the two primary ways of giving or receiving comfort, treating pain. The human or natural, through connection and relationships, and the artificial, the chemical, drugs, medicines. In Pink's case, both the chemical and the human means proved to act as salt poured upon his wounds. Nothing but bricks, just bricks in the wall, laid one on top of the other as time passed. Brick 1, brick 2, and now brick 3. Ironically, although part 3 is a manifesto of sorts, a declaration of his fully embracing this wall and fully rejecting other connections, which in actual fact could have expanded his world and offered freedom and release, he implies that arms around me would be a restraint, an imprisonment, and drugs to calm me would be a means of suppression and control. Think about the arms in his experience for a moment. His mother's arms caged him, preventing his ability to fly. His wife's arms betrayed him for another. His conclusion? I don't need. And that's something else I'll come back to in a minute. Then he continues with this line, I have seen the writing on the wall. Now this phrase, the writing on the wall, is of course a common idiom of speech, rooted in the biblical story of Belshazzar's downfall, the king of Babylon from the book of the prophet Daniel. In this story, a mysterious hand traces prophetic words onto the wall during Belshazzar's feast, foretelling his destruction, which, indeed, as the story goes, happened that very night. Now here, Roger Waters draws on the wall image, which in this context is hardly a cliche expression, as it suggests Pink sees himself as having a prophetic insight and an authority of biblical proportions. Much like the previous song revealed how he believed himself to be a Christ-like innocent sacrifice. It lends a fatalistic air to the scene. A prophecy, after all, is the foretelling of something bound to happen, something no one can change. No one can change the future if a prophecy says that something will happen. And Pink, having divined the future, like a Daniel, has concluded all the means of comfort available in this world are, in the end, poisonous and bound to destroy. The only way to prevent his total destruction is through complete isolation. In other words, he's saying, I saw it all along. There was no way out. But isn't it ironic that Pink had to build his wall first in order to see writing on it? What a self-manufactured prophecy. Now, going to the movie, we are presented with each brick from his past in a collage of images which quickly change from one to the next, an effect that suggests the laying of bricks one on top of the other. We are reminded of everything from the scene in the park when innocent Pink was rejected, to his father's death, to the schoolmaster, his wedding, crawling into bed with his mother, all these scenes rolling one after the other in rapid sequence, and mixed with scenes from a riot. And as I said, I'm going to come back to this idea of riots. So the riot, the revolt, is present in all three parts. Let's start with the last one first. Skinheads in a street revolt, fighting with the police forces. In the second brick, it's children revolting against the school system, tearing down the building, setting it on fire. In the first brick, right at the end of the song, look at young Pink alone in the swing after he has been pushed away by that gentleman. And he's looking to all these children which are accompanied and entertained by their parents. Look into his eyes there, and you will see where and when his revolt against the establishment all began. These scenes with riots and revolts in this third brick are actually Pink's response. Pink saying, "That's what I felt all along, and this is what I should have done from the very beginning." His prophetic insight. And of course, the police forces represent them, the outside world, and its violent manner of pushing back those which are out of line, just like the principal did in school to Pink. The rioters, on the other hand, represent not only Pink, but also all those who understand the reality, who have the right knowledge, who know the truth, who have done the hard work of reading everything. So now they have the right attitude. They do the right thing. I mean, it's Waters' concept and philosophy through and through, which I am not endorsing, I'm not saying is right or wrong, simply because this is not my purpose here and it's not the purpose of this channel. But we see it here in this music. And Vlad showed me the other day the latest of Waters' outcries, we could say, in which he was explaining why he believes all of a sudden the media is against him, trying to ban his concerts in Germany, now in England, in Manchester. And listening to him, I could see as he expressed his mind the same concepts and philosophies as we find in The Wall. But back to the brick part 3. I could not but help noticing again the realism in the way Pink's story is presented. There are hints everywhere that although sometimes it might appear different, Pink is actually wrong. And here in brick 3, we are introduced for the first time to the Nazi concept. For a split second, we glimpse Pink for the first time dressed in a Nazi uniform, while the rioters are shown as skinheads, neo-Nazis. This tells us that although Pink sees himself as the victim and everyone around him is to blame for his pain, in actual fact, he is the abuser. More and more, the violent, abusive Pink grows even to the stature of a Hitler. But that will come later in more detail. Another visual element which is introduced, or rather hinted at, here in brick 3 for the first time, is the worms. Although the first time they are mentioned in the album only comes at Hey You, in the movie they make a little appearance here. And it's fitting, I think, because Waters is using the worms, which of course represent decay and death, to signal the truth of the matter, the reality as it is, not as it is interpreted by Pink. This path, Pink's path, is the path of degradation and death. The scene with the worms is mixed with other scenes in which we see Pink in an asylum bed, which will come again in a later song as well, also revealing the truth. Poor Pink, the orphan, artist, poet, innocent boy, is now losing his mind. And he concludes, "Don't think I need anything at all. No, don't think I'll need anything at all. Anything. Anything? Anything at all?" It contains echoes of perfect isolation here behind my wall. Anyway, again, Pink's selfishness is strongly emphasized. It's all about what I need. Just like in I Need a Dirty Woman. It's all about him, his needs, his pain, his life. And here we have a hint as to what the fundamental cause of his disaster really is. All in all, you were all just bricks in the wall. Pink related to every person in his life as to someone which he might need, might use. He found himself as a young boy in a painful situation, and he gradually started to focus only on the failures of others, only on the mistakes of life towards him. And more than that, and because of that, he started to use others as crutches for his own shortcomings. Consider again the brief wedding scene. There is no joy, no smile on his face, no warmth in his eyes. He turns to kiss his bride as if he has to do it and get it over with. Why? In the hopes that she will be there for him. She will comfort him. She will sustain him. She will understand him. All me, myself, and I. Unfortunately, young Pink didn't see any of the beauty of the world, instead consumed by his own self. Unlike topic-specific parts 1 and 2, part 3 is a blanket condemnation and rejection of all things and everyone. It was, you were all. This lumping all into a nameless all is a crucial step when it comes to creating destructive propaganda and ideologies. Just as crucial as dehumanizing this all into the faceless they. Only by taking these steps can one create a narrative in which this all, that is, they, can become deadwood, weaklings, and worse. Only in this way can we write off the whole world and dismiss it as cruel. Goodbye, cruel world. So this song, the final part of the trilogy, is openly paralleling Pink's reality and the truth. And the question, how should I complete the wall, which appears for the first time in Empty Spaces, seems to have its answer here in part 3 of Another Brick in the Wall. And remember, being the only trilogy on the album and functioning as our interpreter and guide, even giving us the title of the entire work, we need to be careful going forward to retain it in our memory as we navigate the rest of the story. I'll see you next time.